Thanks for listening to the story on Black Stories 365. I hope you have an enjoyable, moving listening experience. Your kind doesn't get real money in my bank, Richard Hale barked, flicking a chrome lighter and touching its blue flame to the corner of a paper that should have been too heavy with value to burn. The check curled, browned, then bloomed into orange, a petal of fire that licked across the inked numerals $2,347,000 before ash feathered down onto the marble like dirty snow. Phones rose all around him in the lobby of First National Bank, downtown Chicago, 2:49 p.m. Tiny glass billboards hungry for outrage. Someone gasped, someone cheered. The espresso machine hissed from the cafe corner with the indifferent rhythm of a city that has seen everything. Naomi Carter did not move. The flame reflected in her irises and then was gone, leaving only the thin ache of smoke. She wore a sand-colored blazer that had seen flights and meetings and funerals, a pair of polished but long-loved flats, and a simple gold band on her right hand, not the left. She watched the ash drift onto the floor, settle against the rubber edge of her shoe, and thought, "This is not the moment to give him." Out loud, she said nothing. Hale's voice swelled to fill the silence he mistook for surrender. "Fake check. Stolen identity. You people always bring the circus," he said, as if the word people were a gate he alone kept. He ground the last ember out beneath Italian leather and straightened his tie with a tug that made the knot creak. A security officer jogged in from the vestibule tugging a canine on a short lead. The shepherd's ears were up, black nose working. A puzzled, honest animal, reading the lobby's new language of smoke and tension. The alarm panel in the manager's alcove chirped from a whiff of heat. The sprinkler heads stayed mercifully still. On the far side of the rope line, a woman in a winter coat whispered to her stream, "Oh my God, he really burned it right there," and rotated to catch Naomi's face, searching for the flicker of humiliation that would make the clip trend. Naomi blinked away the sting in her eyes. Don't inhale the insult. Don't let it stick. A clock above the investment desk sparked at the corner of her vision-red digits that climbed with a calm as brutal as any verdict. 2:50. 11 minutes until every story in this room had to account for itself. Hale plucked her wallet off the counter with 2 fingers and held it up like a wet leaf. "Let's see what else we've got. Counterfeit cards? A borrowed ID? Maybe your cousin's membership to the gym down the block? Please return my property," Naomi said. And her voice was low and even enough to make 2 people in line glance at her, startled that velvet could be stronger than steel. Inside, the thought, breathe. Make space. 3 o'clock is the hinge. He doesn't know it yet. A young teller with an anxious mouth whispered to the woman at the next window. And the whisper traveled in the rippling way of rumor. "She looks familiar. Is she on TV? No, it's the posture." The canine gave a single short bark at the ash pile, then settled into a taut sit, the leash singing as it tightened. Hale gestured toward the dog with a theatergoer's flourish. "Even the animal knows something's off." "He knows there was a fire," Naomi said. Then, because there are moments when dignity requires the smallest movement, she knelt and dabbed once at a blackened scrap with the edge of a napkin from the coffee cart, and dropped it into the waste bin. "You just threw away evidence," Hale crowed. "Thank you for your cooperation." Sarah Mitchell arrived at the edge of the scene with her badge clipped straight and her face not quite as composed as protocol required. 34. Sharp-eyed, a woman who still believed in memos and morning checklists. Sarah took in the lobby at a glance the cameras, the dog, the ash, the posture of a customer who would not fold. She looked at Naomi's shoes, too quietly expensive to match Hale's story. Then the watch on Naomi's wrist. Swiss real, the kind that doesn't beg to be noticed. And then the eyes, calm, not calculating. The calm of someone who knows where the exits are. "Mr. Hale," she said, "we should verify." "We verified." Hale snapped without looking at her. "I used a lighter." Laughter, brittle and relieved, popped in the crowd. It sounded like ice breaking on a lake no one should be standing on. Naomi's phone buzzed in her blazer pocket. She did not reach for it. The vibration ticked out a rhythm against her ribs. Emergency board session, 3 p.m., confirmed. She thought of her mother's hands the way they had smoothed wrinkled deposit slips under the fluorescent lights of a South Side branch, the way they had accepted being called sweetheart by a teenager behind glass. She thought of her father's baritone as he recited a rule every close-run month. We don't give anyone the pleasure of seeing us break. Not for a check. Not for a slur. Not for a borrowed power. Ma'am, the guard with the K9 said gently, as if the word could serve as a plank across a river. We're going to need you to take a seat until CPD arrives. I'll stand, Naomi said. Her pulse was steady enough to count. 2:52. A young man with purple hair moved closer, phone up, lens bright. Say something, he urged, fascinated by the clean line of her stillness. Tell him off. The request landed on her like a memory of being 20 and the world wanting her anger because it crackled so well on tape. She gave the young man a small smile he'd understand years from now. I'm fine. Hale rolled the wallet in his palm, impatient with quiet. What's your real name? He asked. And spare me the story about working a double shift. You typed that check on your cousin's laptop. He pointed at the blackened grit. And now it's gone. No, Naomi said, now it's visible. To who? To whoever was watching closely, she said, and a handful of heads turned toward the floor as if the marble had spoken. Sarah lifted a hand the way you put a brake on a conversation you can't afford to let slide into a ditch. Mr. Hale. She tried again, softer. We could at least run. He waved her into silence and addressed the phones. Ladies and gentlemen online, what you saw was vigilance. This bank does not tolerate fraud. The K9's handler shifted his weight, uncomfortable with a fire that somehow felt colder than any winter. Naomi tipped her chin toward the clock in a motion so small it might have been a shiver. 2:54. The elevator opened. 3 brokers in navy suits spilled into the lobby, caught the weather of the room, and stalled. What happened? One murmured. A lesson, said the woman in the winter coat, and then, realizing she sounded impressed, added quickly, in how to handle criminals. Naomi's chest tightened at that, a small, human wince that didn't reach her face. Don't give away the cost. A cathedral hush fell in her mind and she stepped inside it. The way you step into a side chapel to collect yourself while the choir thunders in the nave. In that hush. 3 o'clock. And then we will use our inside voice and our outside voice at the same time. 2:55. Hale held her driver's license toward the nearest lens so the internet could taste the edge of a name. Naomi Carter, he read. Cute. Almost respectable. Where'd you buy it? At the DMV, she said. And a few people laughed because dignity with dry humor is a tonic in any decade. Sarah, who had come up from tellers to assistant manager the way you climb ice carefully, with steady breath studied Naomi's posture, then glanced, just once, at Naomi's tablet where it hid in the crease of her handbag. There was a case on it, matte black with a small silver emblem that most customers would take for decoration. Sarah recognized the emblem the way a sailor recognizes a tide. She did not smile. She straightened. Mr. Hale, she said, we should move this to your office. We'll move it to booking. Hale answered, pretending he hadn't heard the quaver in her professionalism. Ma'am, final warning, have a seat. Naomi looked at the chair as if it were a history she had outgrown. I appreciate the offer. 2:57. Another buzz against her ribs. A name flashed. David Moore. Need backup? Not yet. She typed with 3 quick strokes, then slid the phone away. The K9 huffed, a dog's sigh at human messes. Naomi turned to the animal for half a second, grateful for a witness without malice. He sensed smoke. The handler explained. Embarrassed to be explaining anything. So do I, Naomi said. 2:58. Hale fished in her wallet again, fingertips triumphant, and came up with a brushed steel card the size and thickness of a museum pass. He squinted at the etching and, not reading it, held it up to the phones. The way a man might hoist a trophy he hadn't earned. What's this? A library card for rich folks? Naomi crossed the inches between them with the easy balance of someone who wouldn't be hurried and wouldn't be stopped. Careful, she said, her tone so courteous it felt like a favor. He almost handed it back. Then remembered the audience and pinched it tighter. No, we'll keep this, he said. Souvenir. The shepherd's ears pricked at the word. 2:59. The lobby seemed to lean forward. The way a theater leans into the last line of a scene. Even the coffee hissed less. Naomi exhaled, and the breath felt like a door swinging on oiled hinges. She set her tablet on the counter and pressed her thumb to the reader. The screen woke with a restrained glow, a crest in corporate blue rising like a seal above a gate. Hale laughed, barking and brittle. "Anyone can fake a login screen," he said, eager for the laugh line. Naomi didn't look at him. "Then let's fake it together," she said, and the screen asked for a token. She entered a 6-digit code from memory. The crest pulsed once. 2 tones chimed from the ceiling speakers, polite, institutional. The sound of a building clearing its throat before a statement. 3. In the small hush that followed, Naomi let herself have one private sentence. "This is the hinge." Then she lifted her gaze to the room that had recorded her humiliation like it was sports and said, "I am not here to perform. I am here to finish a transaction." Hale's mouth opened for another line. The crowd's eyes were the bright of open tabs. The dog's tail made a hopeful thump against the guard's pant leg. Somewhere behind the service doors a printer began to hum, pulling a sheet the way a current pulls a leaf. Naomi touched the steel card in Hale's hand with 2 fingers, a gesture neither plea nor threat. "That belongs on the counter," she said. And for the first time his grip loosened without his permission. He set it down. The etched letters caught a slice of winter sun and threw it back at the lobby in a clean, unflinching line. The clock ticked, the room held its breath, and Naomi stood inside the breath, steady as a plumb line, waiting for the truth that was already on its way. At 3:01 the hum of the printer deepened, and the ceiling speakers released a polite chime that no one in the lobby recognized. Naomi Carter didn't look away from Richard Hale's face. The man's eyes darted to the tablet screen that glowed with a corporate crest, the same blue sigil etched into the steel card he'd just surrendered. He stepped back, trying to regain his posture. "What kind of trick?" he began. But the system interrupted him. Emergency board session initiated. Quorum reached. The voice of the building, calm and female, repeated the announcement across the marble floor. The phones that had been recording began to tremble slightly in the hands of their owners. Even digital spectators sensed that the show had shifted stages. Naomi inhaled slowly, the smell of burned paper still sharp enough to taste. "You burned a check," she said evenly. "But you also burned a bridge you never knew existed." Hale frowned, but before he could retort, she turned toward the small crowd and added, "I asked for a simple transaction. Now we'll make it official." She pressed one key on the tablet. A camera recessed into the lobby ceiling tilted downward, blinking red, focusing on the counter as if summoned. "For transparency," she murmured. The live streamers instinctively lowered their phones, uncertain whether they were witnesses or extras. The K9 handler stepped aside, murmuring to his dog, whose tail brushed the marble in a rhythm that felt like a metronome for the tension. Behind Naomi, the double glass doors slid open. A gust of wind carried in the smell of street pretzels and winter salt. 2 bank executives entered, their ID lanyards flashing gold under the lights. One of them, a heavy-set man with silver hair, stopped short when he saw Naomi. "Madam Chair," he said under his breath, voice cracking between surprise and apology. Hale turned, color draining from his face. "Madam what?" Naomi didn't answer him. She nodded once to the executives. "Thank you for joining. You're right on time." Her tone was calm, like she was calling a meeting in a room that had simply forgotten its walls. Sarah Mitchell, standing near the back, mouthed a silent, "Oh my God," and lowered her clipboard. The executives moved toward the counter, instinctively forming a half-circle around Naomi. "This is an active branch," one of them whispered. "Should we clear?" "No," she said, still watching Hale. "Let them stay. They've all earned the right to see how truth sounds when it's spoken softly." Hale swallowed. "This is nonsense." She walked in with a fake check. "Mr. Hale," Naomi interrupted. "You said it yourself. You verified it with a lighter. That's a method." "Certainly. Primitive, but enthusiastic." A few chuckles escaped the crowd, low and nervous. The silver-haired executive rubbed a hand across his temple. "Richard," he said, voice weary. "You might want to listen before you dig deeper." "Listen to what?" Hale snapped. "This woman's." "My title," Naomi said, cutting through his words like a blade sheathed in velvet. Chairwoman, majority owner of First National Bank. The check you incinerated represented a dividend transfer from one of our investment arms. It was legitimate, audited, and insured. The air folded in on itself, a pause heavy enough to make the clocks hesitate. Hale's lips parted, but no sound came. Behind him, the livestream screens flickered as watchers tried to type fast enough to keep up with humiliation turning inside out. You can't just walk into a branch, he stammered. That's the beauty of owning it, Naomi said softly. You don't have to walk in. You already belong. For a moment, only the faint buzz of the overhead lights filled the space. Then, as if embarrassed by its own bravado, Hale laughed once, a sharp dry sound. If you're the owner, then why this show? Why let me? Because, Naomi said, I wanted to see how the system treats people when no one's watching. Turns out, everyone was watching. She turned the tablet so the lobby camera feed reflected his own face on the screen, sweat beading under the perfect part of his hair. Tell me, Mr. Hale, how often do you decide worth based on wardrobe? I don't. Or skin? The words were quiet, but they carried. Hale's mouth opened, closed. Around them, the onlookers shifted, some ashamed, some enthralled. A man near the cafe muttered, "Damn," under his breath. The K9 gave a soft whine, as if registering a drop in pressure. Naomi gestured to the steel card on the counter. Read it, she said. Hale hesitated, then obeyed, voice hollow. Naomi Carter, chairwoman and majority owner. Good, she said. Now you've finally verified something. She took the card back, sliding it into her wallet. As for the check you destroyed, that was personal, but the act was public. And the public, Mr. Hale, deserves an ending that teaches. She turned to Sarah Mitchell. Miss Mitchell, please note for the record. Richard Hale, branch manager, has violated internal protocol, engaged in discriminatory conduct, and destroyed a financial instrument valued at over $2 million. Sarah nodded slowly, her pen trembling. Hale tried to interject, but Naomi raised a hand. No need to defend. The footage will do that for you. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for repair. The executives exchanged glances. One whispered, "What do you want us to do?" Naomi's gaze stayed on Hale. Justice isn't always a hammer. Sometimes it's a mirror. Mr. Hale will remain employed under conditions. She began listing them as if reading from an invisible document. Demotion to assistant manager. 40% salary reduction. 200 hours of community service at the Southside Financial Literacy Center. And quarterly workshops on equity and client dignity. Led by Miss Mitchell. The whisper of pens scratching joined the rhythm of the clock. Hale's shoulders sagged, his defiance flickered like a candle losing air. Naomi looked around the lobby. This branch will implement the Dignity First protocol. Every employee will attend training. An anonymous line will be opened for clients who experience bias. Transparency reports will go directly to the board. A murmur of approval rose, uncertain but growing. Someone clapped once before realizing applause felt indecent. Naomi's eyes softened. Let's not make this about spectacle, she said. Let's make it about change. Hale stared at her, jaw tightening. You humiliated me. No, she replied. You did that part. I'm just the witness. His mouth twisted. Why not fire me? Naomi considered him for a long beat. Because punishment without understanding breeds repetition. You'll do more good fixing what you broke. She turned to Sarah. Escort Mr. Hale to his office. Then meet me upstairs. We'll draft the internal notice. Sarah nodded, her respect plain. Yes, ma'am. The lobby began to loosen. People put away their phones, the chatter fell to a low hum. The K9 leaned into its handler's leg, finally calm. Naomi glanced once at the wall clock, 3:12 p.m., and exhaled. Her hands trembled just enough to remind her she was still human. She turned to the woman in the winter coat who had filmed earlier. Ma'am, Naomi said, gentle but firm, if you post that video, please include the ending. Truth deserves its full shape. The woman lowered her gaze, guilty. Yes, ma'am. Naomi smiled faintly. Thank you. The executives followed her toward the glass doors, the younger one rushing ahead to hold it open. Outside, The city wind carried the scent of roasted nuts and car exhaust. Naomi paused on the threshold and looked back through the glass. Hale was still standing by the counter, staring at the black smudge where the check had burned. He looked smaller, like the light had changed its mind about him. Sarah was beside him, speaking quietly. And though Naomi couldn't hear the words, she recognized the tone. The beginning of redemption. She stepped out onto the sidewalk. Her phone buzzed. A message from David Moore. Saw the feed, you okay? She typed back, I'm fine, just closing accounts. Then she slipped the phone away and started walking. The sky had turned the color of pewter. Somewhere a street musician was playing an old Sam Cooke tune, A Change Is Gonna Come. The melody floated between traffic horns and the rustle of pedestrians. Naomi smiled to herself, the line of her mouth soft but sure. She thought of her mother's voice, of long lines and small humiliations that built the quiet steel in her spine. Passing a cafe window, she caught her reflection. Tired eyes, yes, but clear. Behind her reflection, a TV on the wall played a breaking news clip from the bank lobby frozen on the frame of her standing calm amid chaos. The caption read, Check burn truth revealed. She shook her head, almost laughing. Stories, she thought, always find their own headlines. She turned the corner toward the parking lot where her black sedan waited, the wind lifting her blazer just enough to show the edge of the steel card tucked safe inside. As she unlocked the car, the first snow of late winter began to fall. Soft flakes that melted before they touched the ground. Naomi looked up, letting one dissolve on her cheek. Justice isn't loud, she thought. It just lasts. Then she slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove into the gray afternoon, leaving behind a bank that would never forget the sound of paper turning to fire or the woman who taught them what it meant to be seen. The next morning, Naomi woke before dawn, the faint gray of Chicago winter filtering through the blinds of her apartment. For a few moments, she lay still, letting the quiet settle. The city was hushed in that fragile hour before commuters began to stir. She brewed coffee in her old French press, the same one her father had used, the scent rising like a familiar ghost. The cup warmed her hands as she scrolled through the headlines on her phone. Every outlet carried the same story. Bank manager Burns' check unaware owner stood before him. Videos of the scene had gone viral overnight, dissected by morning shows and talk radio. Some called her a hero of restraint. Others treated the event as spectacle, a meme for a news cycle hungry for outrage. Naomi sighed, set the phone face down, and stared at the city skyline through her window. She had wanted change, not fame. But fame had arrived uninvited, knocking on every screen. A soft chime from her laptop announced a meeting reminder. Board review. 8 a.m. She dressed simply. Navy slacks and a charcoal sweater. Her steel identification card now worn at the edge from years of handling. On her way out, she paused to feed the stray cat that lingered near her stoop, a gray tabby with one torn ear. Breakfast for both of us, she murmured, pouring a small dish of milk. The cat blinked slow gratitude as she locked the door. By 7:45, she was in the glass tower that housed the bank's executive offices. The air smelled of polish and new carpet. Assistants whispered in hallways, eyes darting toward her with a mix of awe and caution. She could feel their stares how yesterday's event had turned her from a name on documents into a person of myth. As she entered the boardroom, conversations halted mid-sentence. 12 faces turned her way. The skyline of the city reflecting in the long oval table between them. David Moore, her legal advisor, rose slightly from his seat. Morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, she replied, taking her place at the head of the table. Her tone was composed, but she felt the room's nervous pulse. David cleared his throat. We've reviewed the footage and statements. Public Relations is preparing a formal release emphasizing your professionalism. But there's pressure. Naomi investors are uneasy. Uneasy with what? She asked, pouring herself a glass of water. With transparency? With visibility, he corrected. They prefer quiet leadership, not viral leadership. She smiled faintly. Quiet is what got us here. Across the table, an older board member, Whitman, folded his hands. No one disputes your rights, Naomi. But the optics are complicated. The man you disciplined has retained counsel. He's claiming emotional distress, reverse discrimination, even defamation. Naomi met his gaze steadily. He burned evidence of a legal transaction. On camera. And humiliated a client in public. And you, in turn, humiliated him by revealing his ignorance, Whitman said, trying for diplomacy but landing near condescension. The public loves a reversal, but shareholders love stability. Naomi leaned back, eyes narrowing. Stability without accountability is rot. This institution can survive a scandal. It cannot survive silence. The room went still. For a heartbeat. She thought of her mother standing in that South Side branch decades ago. Small and tired and invisible. Naomi would not inherit invisibility. David broke the silence. There's more, he said, sliding a folder toward her. Inside was a printed email chain, anonymous complaints from employees describing Hale's history of dismissing minority customers, belittling junior staff, and manipulating audits. The pattern stretched years back, tolerated for the sake of numbers. He brought in profits, David said quietly. And that bought him indulgence. Naomi's jaw tightened. Then indulgence ends here. She tapped the folder shut. We'll launch an internal ethics audit. Every branch. The room shifted. A few murmurs of agreement. Some of alarm. That's expensive. Whitman objected. So is ignorance, Naomi said. Her tone carried no heat. Only certainty. After the meeting, she retreated to her office overlooking the river. Through the window, she could see small waves glittering beneath the pale light. Chicago's wind scraped against the glass, with a sound like paper tearing. She thought of the check again, the paper that had become ash. Her phone buzzed, a call from Sarah Mitchell. Come in, Naomi said. I was expecting you. Sarah's voice carried both nerves and gratitude. I just wanted to thank you. For standing up. And for not firing him outright. You think he can change? Naomi asked. I think he might, if someone shows him how. Sarah replied. He looked broken after you left. Naomi turned the steel card in her hand, its edges glinting. Broken isn't always bad. Sometimes it's where light gets in. Sarah hesitated. People are talking. Some say you planned it, that you wanted to catch him in the act. Naomi let a small smile curve her lips. I didn't plan him. I just gave him the stage he'd already built. Sarah exhaled, half a laugh, half disbelief. The staff is watching you differently now. They stand straighter. I think they finally believe fairness can have teeth. Teeth and patience, Naomi said. Both are needed. When the call ended, she turned her chair toward the window again. Below, commuters moved like purposeful ants, each carrying invisible weights. A delivery truck rolled past the corner cafe, where a newsstand displayed her photo on the morning paper. The headline read, Dignity First. Woman behind the fire speaks. She hadn't spoken to any reporter yet, but stories had a way of speaking for themselves. A knock at her door. David Moore entered again, holding a slim file. One more thing, he said. Corporate counsel from Hale's team wants mediation. They think if you agree to keep him, they can avoid litigation. Tell them they're correct, Naomi said. David blinked. You're keeping him? He'll serve his hours, complete the program. When he's done, he'll return not as manager, but as a teller. David frowned. That's bold. That's reform, she said. If we preach rehabilitation, we must practice it. She stood, walking to the window, voice softening. Do you remember when we started? My father warned me. They'll test you with money, Naomi. But the real test is mercy. David nodded slowly. Mercy is harder to headline. Then let's make it newsworthy, she replied. As David left, Naomi's gaze drifted across the city once more. Snow flurries began again, faint and persistent. She thought of the people who'd written to her overnight emails, from single mothers, retired veterans, young tellers who said her calm had given them courage to confront their own small injustices. Justice was contagious, she realized, if given a human face. Her office phone rang. Miss Carter, the receptionist said, there's someone here asking to see you, Mr. Richard Hale. Naomi's pulse slowed, not quickened. Send him in. She watched as the man approached through the glass wall, suit wrinkled, eyes sunken, carrying the careful posture of someone who didn't know if they were welcome. He paused at the doorway. "Thank you for seeing me." "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her desk. He obeyed, hands folded tightly. Silence stretched between them. "Finally," he said. "I came to apologize. Not because PR told me to. Because I saw the recording. I looked at myself and didn't like what I saw." Naomi studied him. There was no arrogance now. Just fatigue. "That's a start," she said. "Do you understand what you burned?" "More than paper," he whispered. "Trust. Yours or mine?" she asked. "Both." He swallowed. "I've worked in banks 20 years. I thought I understood people. Turns out I only understood power." Naomi leaned forward. "Power is borrowed. Character is owned." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I'll do the hours. Whatever it takes." "Good," she said. "And when you serve those hours, listen to the people you meet. Don't teach, listen." He stood, straightening his jacket as if reclaiming a piece of dignity not yet earned. "I will." She rose too, extending her hand. He hesitated, then shook it. His palm was cold, trembling faintly. "Thank you," he said, and left. Naomi sat back down, staring at her reflection in the window, the river beyond, restless and gray. Mercy, she thought, was the hardest currency. Her phone vibrated again. Another flood of messages. Journalists requesting statements. Civic groups asking her to speak. She ignored them for now. The city would have its noise. She had her work. Down in the lobby, Sarah watched Hale exit the elevator and knew something unseen had shifted. In the wind outside, the snow had stopped. But the air still held that charged, electric feeling before a storm decides to forgive. 2 weeks later, the city woke under a hard frost that turned the Chicago River to glass. Naomi Carter sat in the back of a town car on her way to the Southside Financial Literacy Center. A place she had funded quietly years before and where Richard Hale had now begun his community service. The driver hummed an old Stevie Wonder tune on the radio, and Naomi let the melody drift over her. The events at the bank had settled into the public's bloodstream like caffeine, strong, brief, and unforgettable. Yet for her, it was not the story's end but its echo that mattered. She arrived just before noon. The center occupied a converted library, its brick walls still etched with faded carvings that read, "Knowledge is power." Inside, children were bent over computers learning budgeting apps, and retirees sat in a circle workshop on credit rebuilding. The smell of fresh coffee and printer ink mingled in the air. Naomi greeted the receptionist with a nod, then walked toward the back classroom where Hale was scheduled to teach. She paused at the doorway. He stood at the whiteboard, sleeves rolled up, explaining compound interest to 3 single mothers and an elderly man in a veteran's cap. His voice was quieter than before, stripped of its old arrogance. He handed out worksheets, bending slightly to answer questions. The sight was almost disorienting. Naomi watched for several minutes before stepping inside. Hale looked up, momentarily startled, then inclined his head. "Miss Carter," he said, voice steady. "Didn't expect you today." "I prefer unannounced visits," she replied. "Keeps everyone honest." One of the women in class whispered, "That's her?" Naomi smiled gently. "Carry on, Mr. Hale, I'm just observing." He continued his lesson, explaining how saving $10 a week could grow over years. His hands no longer chopped the air with authority, they moved in open gestures of patience. When he finished, Naomi dismissed the class with a warm thank you, and asked Hale to walk with her outside. The winter air bit at their cheeks. She studied him for a moment. "You're adapting," she said. "Trying," he admitted. "They don't trust me yet, but I'm learning to listen." "Listening is the first form of respect," she said. "How's the work changing you?" Hale gave a thin smile. "I used to think dignity was something you either had or didn't. Turns out it's something you give." Her expression softened. "Maybe there's hope for you yet." They began walking toward her car, silence folding between them like snow. Suddenly a voice shouted from across the street. A man with a camera sprinted toward them, microphone raised. "Miss Carter, is it true the bank is under investigation for biased lending?" Another followed with flashing bulbs. "Are you protecting Mr. Hale because of guilt?" Naomi froze. Hale stepped forward instinctively, placing himself slightly in front of her. "Back off," he said, his tone protective but calm. The reporters pressed closer, their breath steaming in the cold. One camera snagged the steel card glinting at Naomi's collar. "Show the public your credentials, Miss Carter." Transparency. The crowd from nearby stores began to gather, sensing a scene. Naomi drew herself up. "No comment at this time," she said evenly. But the reporters didn't back away. One reached for her arm. Hale caught the man's wrist. She said no comment. The shove that followed was quick, almost clumsy, but enough to send Hale stumbling into a curbside trash bin. The metallic crash silenced the murmurs. Naomi stepped between them, her voice rising for the first time. "Enough. You have your footage. Leave." The men retreated, triumphant with their sound bites, while Hale rubbed his shoulder, wincing. "Guess old habits die hard," he muttered. "Protecting the boss? Protecting decency," he said. She looked at him with a trace of reluctant pride. "You did fine." Back in the car, as they drove away, Naomi glanced through the window at the reporters still loitering, their cameras like hungry eyes. The world fed on conflict. Peace rarely trended. Her phone buzzed. David Moore calling. "You're on half the feeds already," he said. "They're spinning it as a cover-up." "Let them spin," she replied. "We'll stand still." That night, at home, she sat with her journal open beside a cup of chamomile tea. She wrote a single line. "Justice doesn't end when the cameras turn off. That's when it begins its quiet work." She closed the book and looked toward the framed photograph of her parents on the mantel. Her father in his postal uniform, her mother smiling shyly beside him. "You'd laugh at all this noise," she whispered. "You taught me that truth doesn't need to shout." A week later, she returned to the bank headquarters for the quarterly audit. The building had a different energy now, more greeting nods, fewer wary glances. The Dignity First protocol was in place. Posters in the lobby read, "Respect is our currency." Employees gathered in small groups discussing fairness like it was a product they could finally sell with pride. In her office, Sarah Mitchell waited with a report. "Complaints dropped 30% this month," Sarah said. "Customer satisfaction's up. And Mr. Hale's been punctual every day at the center." "Good," Naomi said. "He'll finish his term in 6 weeks. After that, I want him back here not as a teller, but as a trainer." Sarah blinked. "You trust him to teach others?" "Trust is the final lesson," Naomi replied. "If he's learned it, he'll pass it on. If not, the students will notice before I do." Sarah smiled. "You always play the long game. That's the only game worth playing." That afternoon, Hale requested an appointment. When he entered, he carried a folder and a hesitant look. "I wrote something," he said, handing it over. Inside was a training manual draft titled "Dignity in Practice." A handbook for frontline staff. Naomi flipped through pages filled with clear guidelines, empathy exercises, and reflections. "You wrote this?" she asked. "Between classes," he said. "I figured if I'm learning, they should too." Naomi closed the folder slowly. "You've turned your punishment into a contribution." "I had a good teacher," he said. She met his gaze. "Maybe. Or maybe you finally started listening to the right voice inside you." A soft chime from her computer interrupted them, an incoming alert. David Moore's message flashed. "Federal review incoming. Media escalation expected." Naomi sighed. "It never ends," she murmured. "Change never does," Hale replied quietly. The next day, as predicted, reporters camped outside the headquarters again, chasing the scent of controversy. Hale stood beside the security guards this time, calmly directing them to maintain order. When one journalist shouted, "Mr. Hale, any regrets about what you did?" he answered, "Every day. That's why I'm here to do something different." Inside, Naomi watched from her window. For the first time since the fire in the lobby, she felt something shift inside her, a blend of weariness and hope. She knew there would always be more storms, but the structure she was building could withstand them. She turned to Sarah. "You see that?" Sarah nodded. "That's redemption," Naomi said. "Messy, public, but real." As dusk fell, the sky turned the color of burnt copper, and the city's lights shimmered on the frozen river. Naomi stayed late in her office, reviewing reports, her reflection merging with the skyline in the glass. She thought of Hale's words, dignity as something you give, and understood that justice, too, was a gift that demanded maintenance. When she finally left, the corridors were empty. She walked through the lobby where months ago her check had turned to ash. Now, a framed plaque hung near the counter. They can burn your check, not your worth. Beneath it stood a vase of white lilies, fresh, scenting the air with quiet forgiveness. Naomi paused before it, resting her hand lightly on the glass. In the silence, she could almost hear her mother's voice again. Keep walking, baby. The world changes slow, but it changes. And so she did. Stepping out into the cold night where the wind off the lake carried the faintest warmth of spring. A promise that even in a city of steel and smoke, decency could still take root and grow. Snow melted into thin streams along Michigan Avenue as March pushed its way into the city, and Naomi Carter felt that same slow thaw inside herself. The scandal had cooled. New headlines had replaced her name, but its echo lived quietly in policy meetings, in training sessions, in the way tellers greeted every customer with steadier eyes. The Dignity First program had begun to take root. Naomi spent her mornings walking the lobby, observing, listening. People smiled differently now, less forced, more human. Richard Hale was due to finish his community service this week, and the board's quarterly conference loomed. She had one goal: make the reforms permanent. That morning, her driver stopped before the headquarters, a tower of glass that caught the weak sunlight. Naomi paused on the sidewalk, watching her own reflection merge with the building's sleek facade. You wanted a mirror, she thought, and here it is. Inside, the energy was brisk. Sarah Mitchell greeted her with a stack of reports. Complaints are at a 5-year low, she said. Customer retention's up 12%. Naomi smiled. Good. Numbers make believers of skeptics. She poured coffee and took her seat at the long board table, where familiar faces awaited. Whitman, the cautious veteran, Patel, the young analyst hungry for reform, and David Moore, steady as ever beside her. Whitman began. Madam Chair, while we commend your leadership, some shareholders remain concerned about perception. This bank's identity shouldn't hinge on one viral moment. Naomi met his eyes. It doesn't. It hinges on credibility. We're not selling apology. We're selling trust. Patel nodded. Community branches are reporting better turnout. People feel welcome again. Whitman sighed, but even he couldn't argue with success. Then there's the matter of Mr. Hale, he said finally. He's requested reinstatement beyond his probation. Some question whether it's wise. I've read his evaluations, Naomi said. He's met every requirement. He's earned a chance. The room murmured, split between approval and doubt. She raised a hand. I'll take personal responsibility. If he fails, he answers to me. Whitman leaned back. You're betting on transformation. Always, she said. That's the only investment that multiplies. The meeting adjourned near noon. As Naomi walked back to her office, her phone buzzed with a message from Hale. I'd like to show you something before the audit team arrives. She replied. Conference room 3, 15 minutes. When she entered, Hale was already there, standing beside a portable display. Gone was the nervous contrition that had marked him weeks ago. He looked focused, deliberate. I built a pilot module, he said, gesturing toward the screen. The title read Empathy Simulator, Frontline Edition. He clicked play. A short animation unfolded a digital training tool presenting everyday banking scenarios through the eyes of a customer. The first was an elderly man confused about online forms. The second, a young immigrant woman struggling with language barriers. Hale's voice narrated softly, explaining how staff could recognize frustration before it hardened into shame. Naomi watched, impressed. You did this yourself? With the center's help, he said. The people I taught, they became my consultants. She smiled. So the teacher became the student. More like the student finally started teaching the right things. He replied. She studied the screen's closing line. Dignity begins when understanding replaces assumption. It felt like a benediction. Let's make this standard training, she said. Company-wide. He blinked. You're serious? You earned it, she said. And because redemption means more when it helps others find their way back too. The next day, News of the program spread through internal networks. Staff volunteered to participate. Even Whitman stopped by her office with an awkward half-smile. "It's good work," he admitted. "Unexpected, but good." Naomi chuckled. "You mean, unprofitable but right." He shrugged. "Sometimes those align." Yet beyond the corporate applause, another storm gathered quietly. An anonymous leak had reached the press, old emails showing years of systemic neglect predating her tenure. The headline read, "Dignity, First Bank hid past bias claims." The irony stung. Reporters swarmed again, this time not as curious observers but as accusers. By afternoon, the lobby was chaos. Echoing that first day months ago. Naomi faced the cameras at a brief press conference. Her voice carried through the marble hall. "Yes, these records exist. They show where we failed before we learned. Hiding them would mean repeating history. We will release a full report and hold ourselves accountable." Questions flew. "Are you resigning?" "No," she said calmly. "I'm leading. Justice isn't running from the fire. It's walking through it." The clip aired across the country that night. Commentators debated her choice, reckless transparency or moral courage. In her apartment, Naomi watched silently, sipping tea. The same old mug, the same city outside, but the weight on her chest had changed. It was not shame, it was purpose. She wrote in her journal, "Sometimes the truth burns twice, the first time as pain, the second as light." The following morning, she arrived early to find Hale waiting outside her office, newspaper in hand. "Rough night," he said. "They're calling for your resignation." "Let them call," she said. "Truth has bad PR before it earns respect." He hesitated. "If you want me to speak publicly, defend the reforms, I will." "No," she said softly. "You already did. By changing." The audit that week was grueling. Federal inspectors combed through files, interviewed staff, evaluated every branch. Naomi stayed late each night, reviewing data, her patience steady as stone. On the final day, an inspector approached her privately. "I've seen plenty of banks talk about ethics," the woman said. "Yours is the first I've seen try to live it. That doesn't erase the past, but it does rewrite the future." Naomi nodded, gratitude warming the edges of exhaustion. When the report came back, it was fair. Recommendations for oversight, praise for transparency, and a note on cultural restoration. The board gathered again to hear the verdict. Relief softened the room. Whitman turned to Naomi. "You survived another storm." "We all did," she said. "Together." Later that evening, she found Hale in the nearly empty lobby, staring at the plaque with the burned check behind glass. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think this was just a reminder of my mistake. Now it feels like a warning to everyone else." Naomi joined him, hands clasped. "Symbols evolve. What matters is who carries them forward." He glanced at her. "You think people will forget?" "No," she said. "But maybe they'll remember for the right reasons." The last customer of the day, a teenage boy, approached the counter to cash a small paycheck. Hale smiled warmly. "First job?" The boy nodded. "Congratulations," Hale said, guiding him through the form. Naomi watched from a distance, the smallest smile curving her mouth. The world had shifted by inches, but inches mattered. As she stepped outside, dusk settled over the city like a velvet curtain. The wind carried faint notes of a street saxophone playing "A Change Is Gonna Come." Naomi paused, closing her eyes, letting the music fill the spaces that once held anger. Justice, she thought, was never a straight line, it bent, slowly, toward decency. She walked toward her car, the river glinting under streetlights, her reflection steady in the water. Tomorrow, there would be more work, more scrutiny. But for tonight, she allowed herself to believe that integrity, quiet, persistent, and unglamorous, could outlast the noise. 6 months later, spring sunlight spilled through the wide glass windows of First National Bank, painting gold over the marble floors that had once reflected only tension. The city outside hummed with ordinary life, vendors calling near the plaza, cars sliding past on wet streets. The distant echo of church bells marking another Sunday morning. Inside, the lobby had changed. Where the blackened mark of the burned check had once stained the floor, A small bronze plaque now stood beneath a framed display titled "The Cost of Assumptions." Behind the glass lay the ashes of that check, preserved on black velvet, the inscription below reading, "They can burn your check, not your worth." Customers stopped to read it. Some smiled, some fell silent. Naomi Carter arrived just as the branch opened. She carried no entourage, only a cup of black coffee and her steel identification card clipped neatly to her blazer. Staff greeted her warmly. There was laughter from the teller's row, and Hale's low voice explaining something to a new recruit. Sarah Mitchell approached with a tablet. "Morning, Naomi," she said. "You're early." "Habit," Naomi replied. "The building feels different before the day begins." Sarah grinned. "Different in a good way, I hope." "In a living way," Naomi said, glancing toward the display. "The air remembers." They walked toward Hale, who was guiding a young employee through the new empathy simulator. The screen displayed a scenario of a struggling single parent applying for a loan. "Don't just look at the numbers," Hale told the trainee. "Look at the person. Numbers don't tell you who's tired, who's scared, who's trying." The trainee nodded, jotting notes. When he saw Naomi, Hale straightened. "Morning, Miss Carter." "Morning, Mr. Hale," she said. "How's the first class?" "They're quick," he said. "Smarter than I was at their age." She smiled faintly. "Wisdom has a late arrival sometimes." He chuckled, a genuine sound. "You were right," he said. "Teaching does something to the soul. It repairs it," she said softly. "Sometimes piece by piece." As they spoke, a woman in her 70s approached the counter, clutching a small purse. Her steps were careful, her expression wary. Hale turned to assist her. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" She hesitated, glancing at his name tag, perhaps remembering the man from the old news clips. "I'm here to close an account," she said. "My husband passed last month." Her voice trembled. Hale nodded gently. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said. "We'll take care of everything." As he guided her through the paperwork, Naomi watched quietly. His tone carried something she had never heard from him before. Humility shaped by compassion. When the woman left, she pressed his hand and whispered, "Thank you, son." Hale stood still for a moment, visibly moved. Naomi approached. "That's the sound of progress," she said. He nodded. "That's the sound of forgiveness. Not just hers," Naomi added. "Yours too." The day moved steadily. By afternoon, sunlight turned the lobby amber. Naomi retreated to her office upstairs, reviewing quarterly results. Profits were stable. But what pleased her most were the handwritten notes pinned on the community board. "Thank you for listening. I felt seen today. This place gave me a second chance." She ran her fingers along them, remembering each face. Sarah entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You should see the numbers on the Dignity first survey," she said. 98% satisfaction. Naomi smiled. "The remaining 2% keeps us honest." "You've changed this place," Sarah said. "Maybe even the city a little." "Not me," Naomi said. "Us. Change is a group project." Outside, clouds gathered, threatening rain. The light shifted again, silver now, soft and reflective. Naomi stood, gazing through the window at the river. "Do you ever think about that day?" Sarah asked quietly. "Every morning," Naomi said. "It reminds me how fragile grace can be, and how loud silence used to feel." "And Hale?" "He reminds me that people can outgrow their worst moments." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We all need a chance to rewrite our endings." The intercom buzzed. "Miss Carter, there's a visitor here to see you," the receptionist announced. "Says it's personal." Naomi exchanged a look with Sarah. "Send them up." The elevator doors opened minutes later, revealing a woman Naomi hadn't seen in 20 years, Mrs. Lucille Grant, the retired branch manager from Naomi's childhood neighborhood. Her hair was snow-white now, but her posture remained proud. "Miss Carter," she said with a trembling smile. "Or should I say Madam Chair?" "Mrs. Grant." Naomi breathed. "You remember me." "Hard to forget the little girl who asked for a loan to buy her mama's first washing machine," the older woman said. They both laughed. the sound warm. I saw you on the news, Mrs. Grant continued. You handled it with more grace than I ever could have managed. Your mother would have been proud. Naomi blinked back tears. She taught me everything I know. Then she taught you right. They spoke for nearly an hour, sharing stories of the old branch, the customers who'd come and gone, the unspoken lessons of patience. Before leaving, Mrs. Grant pressed a small envelope into Naomi's hand. Inside was a faded Polaroid. Naomi at 15, standing beside her mother in that Southside bank, both smiling shyly. On the back, in looping handwriting, it read, "Never forget where you learned worth." When Mrs. Grant left, Naomi stood at her window again, the photo trembling slightly in her hand. The rain had begun, soft and steady, streaking the glass with threads of silver. Down below, she could see Hale holding the door for a customer, Sarah laughing with the tellers, and a child tugging her father's sleeve to show him the plaque on the wall. The image blurred through the rain, becoming almost luminous. Naomi's reflection merged with it until she could no longer tell where she ended and the story began. She whispered to herself, "Justice isn't loud. It just lasts." The words settled in the air like a benediction. The office lights dimmed automatically as evening fell. Naomi gathered her coat and the photograph, pausing at the door to take one last look around. The steel card on her desk caught a sliver of light from the hallway, a quiet emblem of authority turned humility. She touched it once, then turned off the light. In the lobby, the night security guard nodded as she passed. "Evening, Miss Carter," he said. "Evening, Joe, keep the peace." "Always," he replied with a grin. She stepped outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the air washed clean, the pavement reflecting the glow of street lamps. Across the street, a street musician played a slow saxophone tune, something bluesy and hopeful. Naomi dropped a bill into his case and stood for a moment, letting the music thread through her. Her car waited by the curb, engine purring softly. As she opened the door, she looked back once more at the towering glass building. Behind those windows, she knew, people were working differently, now seeing differently. It was not perfection, but it was movement. And movement, she thought, was mercy in motion. She drove off into the night, the city lights gliding past like constellations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new doubts, maybe even new fires to put out. But tonight, the world felt possible again. In the quiet rhythm of the tires against wet asphalt, Naomi heard her father's old voice, steady, kind, proud, saying, "They'll test you, Naomi. But remember, real justice doesn't shout. It endures." She smiled at the memory, eyes fixed on the road ahead, where the skyline shimmered in rainlight like a promise kept.